dark side. Make us bend like bamboo. Pull us back out of the riptide. Minds running wild. Save us from going to the dark side. Make us bend like bamboo. Pull us back out of the riptide. Minds running wild.
Hello and welcome. We are the Aussie Guys. I'm AJ. I'm in Aussie Guys studio on my own this evening for our Bengals preview. I'm about to get on the line Paul Dehner Jr. We spoke to him, actually, might have spoken to him a couple of years in a row. He's fantastic to chat to. He is the Bengals beat writer and video host for the Cincinnati Enquirer. He's got as I said, he's got a podcast. You can follow him at Paul Dehner, Dehner Jr. on Twitter. And let's get him on the line, have a chat. Bengals. Okay, so we've got Paul on the line. Paul, a very warm welcome to you.
Hey, great to be with you.
Now, I think it might be our third time we've chatted, perhaps. I think we've had you on a few times now.
Yes, and I'm thrilled, and thanks to everybody that listens to your podcast, because I think Australia has the second largest international audience we have for our Bengals Beat podcast. So I think you helped us hook some people. So I love it. I'm always on board. I love the Australian following. I keep trying to convince my bosses to send me out there, and the expense reports continually get rebuked, but I'm still going to keep trying.
Oh, man. Oh, that's good to hear. That's fantastic to hear. And I was just saying to you before I hit record that we're really grateful of your time, really appreciate your time. And we know it's such a busy, we're heading into a really incredibly busy time of year where I'm sure, you're not going to get a whole lot of sleep yourself, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I have a 14-month-old, so the whole no sleep thing has been kind of in the works for a little while now. So it'll be more of the same, just for different reasons.
Yeah, my word. And I think it's going to be, in ways, there's a whole lot of things that are sort of on the table for the Bengals because, there's so much that's the same, but then there's so much that's different. A whole lot of pressure, I think, on the team as well. I might just start with a really quick recap of 2017, and then I'll get your thoughts. So, 2017, well, look, it didn't really play the way that Bengals fans or the organisation would have liked. Obviously, a 7-9 finish. Season started with 2 straight losses. The Bengals didn't score a single TD in those losses, and OC Ken Zampese was fired. Bill Lazor made the switch to OC from quarterbacks coach, and although there was improvement, I think that across the board, the Bengals, they weren't the Bengals of, well, the offense didn't really reach the heights that it has in previous years, is probably a fair statement. Marvin Lewis sort of continues to be embattled, and we'll talk about that, no doubt. He's back for his 16th season. Mm-hmm. Andy Dalton, I guess, you've got a quarterback. You've got a quarterback there, but he's often criticised as well. He's not the best, but he's not the worst. So he's in his 8th season. All-pro wide receiver AJ Green obviously is a shining light. He's in his 8th. He'll be, in his 8th year with the team. And on the defensive side, Vontaze Burfict is in his 7th year. But again, like it's happened so many times before, is suspended for the first 4 games of the year. So there's a whole lot that's the same, and yet it's, I don't know, there's a whole lot that sort of needs to change. And yeah, it's going to be an interesting year. But what was your take on 2017 though, Paul?
2017, I think it was, I kind of termed it all year that this team was in as much rebuilding as much as you sort of can in the NFL, where you always have a chance. But it was a young core that they have. They really suffered from missing in a couple of drafts. And the Bengals are not real active in free agency. That's part of their thing. They're always going to lead the league or be in the top couple in most homegrown players because they're not going to go spend a bunch in free agency. So So when they miss on drafts, it really shows itself in the next 2 to 3 years after that. It showed itself when they hit on a ton of drafts in a row and made the playoffs for 5 straight years from 2011 to 2015 because they had huge drafts, 09, 10, 11, 12. They were hitting in the top rounds. They were hitting in the middle rounds. They were finding all pros in the 4th round, whether you're talking about Geno Atkins or Michael Johnson or Marvin Jones or George Iloka or Mohamed Sanu. All these guys are late-round picks, and they're just hitting over and over and over again. That showed itself in that playoff run. They had the 2014 and 2015 drafts went terribly for them. They have a couple of small pieces they got from it, but for the most part, there's a ton of whiffs in there, and it really came back to bite them. And then when you throw a few key injuries in there, Tyler Eifert, and his continued injury issues being a part of it, when he was really a non-factor last year, they did not have anywhere near enough weapons around Andy Dalton to get him to the level he was at in 2015 when he was in the MVP conversation. He's a guy, you said it earlier, he's not the best, he's not the worst. He needs people around him to make the show work, and he just hasn't had that on the offensive line first and foremost. And that obviously showed itself. They couldn't run. They were on a historically bad running yards per carry pace about 8 or 9 games in last year. I'm talking like worst in 30 years in the league. And they eventually turned it around and actually started running the ball decently the last 5 or 6 games of the season. But the offensive line held them back. The defense was so-so. They gave up way too many late touchdowns at the end of the half and at the end of games that cost them a bunch of close games. So they had a lot of issues, and they really did do a lot of cleaning house. Despite keeping Marvin Lewis, they had the biggest changeover in coaching staff that they've had since Marvin Lewis arrived.
Yeah, and sometimes that's kind of the key indicator that the head coach is on the hot seat or the next one to go. It's been quite surprising that he's been able to sort of maintain his position as head coach. And, he's probably one of the longest tenured head coaches in the league. So how do you explain it? No, that sounds like a terrible question, but
no.
Yeah.
But the right question, because it's the only thing that you can really say anymore, is how you explain this.
Yeah.
That a guy in this league and in this era of quick reaction and moving on, where nobody, how many coaches in this league have even been with the team they're with more than 6 years? It's pretty rare. And to be in year 16 and have never even won a playoff game, much less even been to a Super Bowl, it's unprecedented, and there's the only word for it, because it is. This isn't something like this has never happened. Of course, the loyalty and conservative pace of owner Mike Brown in this league is also unprecedented. And as far as what happened is Mike Brown and Marvin Lewis sat together for the 2 days after the season ended, and they looked and realized that each other was their best option. And I don't know that Marvin expected that to be the case, and I don't know that Mike necessarily thought that would be the case, but they eventually, I think Mike wanted somebody he's comfortable with. He's not at an age or point in his life where he wants to scrap it and start over with someone he doesn't know and give his franchise over to some new guy from outside who's going to shake his world up. He wanted somebody he knew. Now, there's a lot of options out there. That could have been Hugh Jackson. That could have been Jay Gruden. That could have been Vance Joseph. It could have been a promotion from within, like a guy like Paul Gunther. But when he looked up, none of them were really there. Gunther technically, but it was those guys didn't get fired, where a lot of people thought one of those guys was going to be let go last year, and there was a retention that happened at the end of last season across the league. And so when there weren't a lot of options that Mike Brown was comfortable with, he saw the one he was most comfortable with right in front of him, and that guy was willing to make, and they agreed to make, a lot of changes with everything else. And so you have Carol Austin in as a new defensive coordinator. you have Bill Lazor scrapping the entire offense because what he was running last year was Ken Zampese's offense and trying to make it fit. Well, he's pretty much scrapped it completely and starting over, and in his eyes, and it's the biggest offense change that Andy Dalton has ever seen. Because every coordinator that's come in since Dalton came in 2011 has run essentially the same system with a few new pieces in it. This is getting rid of the old playbook and bringing in an entirely new one. So you've got massive change on defense, massive change on offense. You have them reforming the entire offensive line with Cordy Glenn now in at left tackle and Billy Price, their first-round pick, going to be starting at center. There's a lot of change happening here, and despite the fact that the guy at the top is entering his 16th season, we haven't seen this much change inside of the Bengals organization in a long, long time.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you sort of brought that up because, I mean, Paul Gunther, while good, Terrell Austin is. I mean, there's a guy that was in the running for head coaching positions. And it may well be that, you don't hang on to him for very long even, but it's a guy that's really highly regarded. And it's interesting to hear about what's happening on the, with Bill Lazor and retooling the offense because, while a lot of it, as I sort of said in the opening, while a lot is staying the same, but I mean, it could be a radically different Bengals team that sort of sees the field.
Yeah, and I expect it to be. And what you mentioned, I think, is a big part of why Mike thought it was best to keep Marvin Lewis around. And it's that if you were going to change your coaching staff and you were going to hire a bunch of new leaders of this team to try to reinvigorate it, that there's one thing that you really can't dog Marvin on much over the course of his career. It's making very good hires, particularly at the coordinator position. I mean, he hired Jay Gruden out of nowhere, who's obviously been a head coach now in Washington for a long time. He got Mike Zimmer to the next level. Hugh Jackson, he was able to bring in. Vance Joseph, he was able to find as a DB's coach. Gunther as well through a promotion. He developed these guys. He's found these guys in weird places and understood what a leader looks like. You can say a lot about Marvin Lewis and where he's fallen short, but you'd have a hard time hating on his hires to his staff, and that's been proven out across the league. So if you were looking to reformat your coaching staff, he would be the guy to do it, and I think you have to be excited by Terrell Austin is maybe the most prominent in terms of position, but maybe the most impactful is getting Frank Pollock, the offensive line coach from the Dallas Cowboys. Now they essentially traded with the Cowboys, who now have Paul Alexander, who was the long time offensive line coach here. That was the most drastic move that the Bengals made. Paul Alexander had been here for 2.5 decades. And he had a very unique way of teaching the position, and there was a thought that was not translating to the talent that they had. And they think that Frank Pollock really will, and there's a lot of positive momentum around what he's doing and what he's going to be able to get out of certain guys that are here that were former very high picks, where you're talking about Cedric Awuzie or Jake Fisher, or a guy like Christian Westerman who played some last year, that he's going to be able to help take those guys to the next level. So, I think those were a couple of big hires that the team expects to be able to help get them over the hump and get them back to where they expect to be next year.
As you sort of alluded to, the Bengals are generally not sort of that busy in free agency, so let's just lump free agency and the draft all together. Obviously, A.J. McCarron left for an opportunity with the Bills, and Jeremy Hill has gone to the Patriots, but you did get in via trade with the Bills. You got left tackle Cordy Glenn, which is a fantastic addition. That's probably the biggest free agent addition, I guess. Chris Baker, defensive tackle, and Preston Brown. I mean, linebacker was an area of need. Preston Brown is, he's above average, so it's sort of nice to at least have that piece in the middle of the D. And then a few, it's always hard to kind of assess a draft, but nice to see, at least in the first round, them picking an offensive lineman, because the O-line play, obviously, was terrible. So, Billy Price at pick 21, Jesse Bates, a safety in the second round, Sam Hubbard, defensive end, in the third. Malik Jefferson, another linebacker, in the third. And Mark Walton, a running back, in the fourth, which is kind of a curious pick, but maybe just a bit of a talent, best player available kind of a pick. And I didn't list the other ones in there, but what were your thoughts just in general with sort of all those off-season sort of acquisitions or moves?
I thought the Cordy Glenn move was one of the better moves we've seen from this team in a long time. They did a great job of understanding what their assets were and how they could make the most out of them to try to really overhaul that thing up front. And to give up the 12th overall pick, not move out of the first round, understand that they were not going to find what they wanted at left tackle. They needed a new left tackle. That was no secret. It was priority number one. They were not going to find what they wanted and not win a bidding war in free agency for that position. Nate Solder was really the only guy out there, and he was going to command, 10, 11, 12 million dollars. And were they willing to pay that and get into a war trying to bring that guy in free agency? No. And instead, they were able to essentially go 2 for 1 by only moving back 9 spots in the first round because the Bills were desperate to get up to get a quarterback. And know that that's where this was a really one of the best center classes that we've seen in a long time, and understand that spot was going to be available right there at 21, so they could hit both of the offensive line spots with one move, and they did. To add Cordy Glenn, and you have to hope that he's healthy, but by all accounts he is, and if he stays healthy, you have an above-average fringe Pro Bowl left tackle, and what you hope to be the pillar of your offensive line at center for the next 5 to 10 years in Billy Price. And you did that by only giving up 9 spots in the draft. And that's why I thought that was a great move. What I would have liked to have seen more from them is to not stop there. They sort of stopped with the offensive line at that point. I'd have liked to have seen one more pick and throw somebody who was maybe one of their 2 third-rounders or even that 4th-rounder used on Walton and get somebody in there on the right side. But in their opinion, there was nobody there that fit the value that they were looking for in the draft on the offensive line. So, they turn it over to Frank Pollock and say, hey, make Jake Fisher, make Christian Westerman, make Alex Redmond, any of these guys, make Bobby Hart, make one of these guys work for us. And that's kind of on him a little bit. And so I thought that was a great move. I think they really upgraded the defense in theory in the draft. We'll see how that pans out, though. You can think that you've done a lot of good things in the draft. They had a lot of swings at it. They accumulated a lot of picks, but we'll see how many of them pan out. I can tell you this, though. If this draft does pan out to be in the same vicinity as 2016 and as 2017, the Bengals are going to be making another string of consecutive playoff runs because they have the core, and they had enough picks to add to the core of putting a team into the future that can ascend big time, that can win AFC North titles because they drafted so well last. They had one of their best rookie classes that in recent memory last year. Carl Lawson in the 4th round turned to be an incredible steal. Jordan Willis is going to have a bigger role this year at the other defensive end position. He played really well in the small role. I think he's my number 1 breakout candidate for this team this year. I think he could really be big time. You get into guys like Joe Mixon, and all of that was without John Ross having any impact. So, if you can get something in that vicinity out of this draft and combine it with 2016 where you ended up with William Jackson, who looks like he could be an all-pro for 3 to 4 years, you could have something special.
Especially when you figure that, the North is, I guess as while you've got Big Ben under center in Pittsburgh, the Steelers are going to remain, pretty strong. But the AFC in general is, quite weak, really, across the board. And I guess, Tom Brady's going to hang up the cleats at some point. So there's opportunity, you'd think.
Yeah, everybody wants to crown Pittsburgh, and rightfully so. Ben Roethlisberger's there. Antonio Brown's there. They've got a good defense. I mean, Pittsburgh is on the throne and have been. Someone's got to go get him, and Lord knows the Bengals haven't done that. They can't beat that team in Paul Brown Stadium for the life of them. So, at some point, and I've kind of written this a couple times, and most notably last year, the Bengals have a Steelers problem. And the fact that they can't beat them is why they can't become a preeminent team in the North. And they have to find a way to be able to beat the Steelers, and the same goes for any team that wants to take over this division. I think the Browns are going to be better because they can't be worse, and they have added a few competent pieces. I'm not all in on the Browns hype train like many people are. The Ravens still have Joe Flacco, as far as I know. So, I count them out for the most part because of that. I mean, they've been overrated since the year after they won the Super Bowl, and have been pretty much a non-factor for the most part. So to me, you're right. It is open, but the Bengals have to overcome the biggest problem that the organization has as far as regular season goes, and that's they can't beat the Steelers. If they can do that, they can find a way to do that. Absolutely, this division is attainable for them. They're going to need a few things to go together and stay healthy in a few spots.
Yeah, and one of those things is Andy Dalton. So let's just touch on Andy Dalton briefly. I mean, you can put some of it on the O-line. I didn't mention, of course, the losses in the 2017. Am I going the right direction? The 2017 offseason, obviously Andrew Whitworth was a massive loss to the team. But Andy Dalton didn't have such a great year last year. I guess, his completion percentage dipped below 60%. He doesn't turn the ball over, which I guess is that's a positive on the positive side of the ledger. But at the same time, he's not sort of, he's not rising to any sort of heights. He's sort of steady, but yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it?
He's steady and needs to be lifted. I do think you can win with him. I think until they find themselves in a spot where they feel like they have a better option in the draft or access to, they're not going to go out and break the bank, and rarely is there a Kirk Cousins type, they're not going to enter that conversation. But, how different really is Andy Dalton from Kirk Cousins? Certainly not $15 million a year difference, which is the difference between what they're paid. They have him on a bargain deal. But what's going to be interesting with Andy Dalton, if you're looking at him in the big picture, I think you can feel solid that he will be the quarterback for the next couple of seasons. Him and Marvin Lewis are sort of eternally tied together in that fact. They're going to go if a new coach comes in, he's probably going to not want Andy Dalton. But as long as Marvin's here, he's probably going to stay in behind number 14 if he has the entire time. But Andy Dalton's contract will come up in 2020, and what will they do? Because you know what? As much as people will criticize, there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to be willing to pay him what his market value is, which in today's quarterback market is a massive number. And so are they going to be willing to go in and pay that, or are they going to be trying to cultivate the next generation of quarterback? How in on Andy Dalton are they? Are they $25 million in on Andy Dalton? Would you be? There's to me the bigger picture of him is much more interesting than the short term, because I think the short term is simple. If Marvin Lewis is here, Andy Dalton will be the starting quarterback, and that's this year and that's next year. But at that point, you start getting into wondering what direction they're going to go with that position. They're aware of that. They're very much aware of how lucky they are to have the deal that they have with Andy Dalton, because it does allow them to build around him, which most teams that have any kind of quarterback that is on his second deal have sacrificed the ability to build around that quarterback because they're paying him so much. I can't point more directly at the Baltimore Ravens, where that's exactly what happens. That's how you miss the playoffs as many times as Baltimore has, because they lost 3 key starters in order to pay Joe Flacco. You can't do that. It sets you back. And so they're lucky to have Dalton on the affordable deal that they do. But what will happen when his deal comes up, that's much more interesting.
Yeah, it certainly will be very interesting to see what happens. Let's have a look at running back. So running back, obviously, the whole running core sort of struggled last year behind that offensive line, but there was some glimmers of some real talent of Joe Mixon, and he sort of looks to shine hopefully this year behind that revamped O-line and in a new scheme. And Gio Bernard, who's just, he's a bit of a gem, and he'll sort of handle the third down and pass catching opportunities, you'd think. But how do you sort of see the running back core playing out?
Yeah, I mean, they plan to basically build the offense around Joe Mixon. I think they recognize his talent. They recognize how good he can be when given some space. He showed that, and I think, I think he's going to have 20 touches a game, and that's a big number, and especially when considering Gio, the talent that he'll have, and that he will be in there on third downs and things like that. But I think they want this to feel like Joe Mixon's offense in a lot of ways, and establish that running game. And they brought in Frank Pollock, and so to draw a direct correlation, makes Joe Mixon be Ezekiel Elliott. Road grade people and let Mixon get some space and give him the ball, feed him the rock, and then run play action off it. Have Dalton be Dak Prescott, all those things. And so I think that's a lot of what you're probably going to see. And that's why I'm sort of, I'm driving the Joe Mixon bandwagon, trying to tell people, look out, like they are going to feature this guy in a huge way. And so I expect this to kind of be if the Bengals rise up this year, it's because it was a coming out party for Joe Mixon.
I look forward to that. Now, the receiving core, let's just sort of lump it all together. Obviously, AJ Green is, he's AJ Green. There's not much more we can sort of add to that. Brandon LaFell was pretty solid as the number 2, 52 catches for 548 yards last season. You already mentioned John Ross, and, he was sort of need to see something out of him. And then sort of some question marks around tight end. So I was also kind of wanting to ask you about Tyler Eifert and how he's travelling. Obviously, Tyler Croft played pretty well with the opportunities he had last season, so it'll be handy to have both of them if they're both healthy. But how's that all coming together, Paul?
Yeah, the Tyler Eifert, I honestly think like during the off season, as we peppered Marvin Lewis with questions about Tyler Eifert's health, he had to have been thinking, I cannot believe 6 years later I'm still sitting here answering questions about if Tyler Eifert is healthy. Because it's all you ever really can ask and have answered about him. Because when he's healthy, the truth is apparent. Everybody knows what Tyler Eifert is when he's healthy. He just can't stay healthy. And, they signed him to a very incentive-laden contract where it's 5.5 base, but it can go up to 8.5 if he basically plays. And they're hoping he's going to be healthy. He had, for some reason, he was not participating in at the end of minicamp, so we'll learn more when training camp starts about where he's at health-wise. I honestly wish I could tell you. I don't know. We won't know until they start executing their plan for him. But, to think that a guy he's never really been through a full season and played in all of the team's most important games, to suddenly do that now as the injuries pile up and back surgeries and all the stuff, it's unlikely. But if they could get 12 games and the playoffs out of Tyler Eifert, that would be a huge win. I think you have to rethink the way, and I think they want to rethink the way a little bit that you use him. In that he's got to kind of be on a pitch count, right? And if you like Tyler Croft, and Tyler Croft showed he can handle some things, put Tyler Eifert on a pitch count. Have him only play about 50% of the snaps. Use him on third downs in red zone where he's at his best, and have Tyler Croft in there for more of the running stuff. Why not do that? Because if that means having him healthy in January, that's something they have to be open to. I think they have to be open-minded with how to deal with Tyler Eifert because he's just such a unique talent and has so much injury history. you've got to think outside of the box, and we'll see how much they do. They've talked about it, but we'll see how much they actually do it. In the same note, I mean, John Ross, you talk about injuries. He came in with injuries. He battled injuries all year. He got healthy. He got directly into Marvin Lewis's doghouse, even though Marvin Lewis claims he does not have a doghouse, but he very much does, and John Ross lived in it. And he had 17 snaps. He had 17 snaps for the number 9 overall pick, who had the ability to change the offense. Right, he's going to open everything up, and we didn't really see it. He has shown positively this offseason. He's in the offseason program fully this year. He can be a game changer. He still is not very polished. He makes some plays and doesn't make some others, but you see why. You can see there's glimpses of exactly why John Ross was drafted where he was. How much of that will come out this year will be a big deal. Along the same lines with Joe Mixon, if this team's going to rise up, I think John Ross has to unseat Brandon LaFell and really become a deep threat.
Yeah, especially for the draft capital, the investment, you really sort of want to see it. So let's move across to the defense, and we already kind of mentioned that Terrell Austin's taking over there. It's going to be interesting to see how. I mean, it's a pretty. I was going to say pretty good. It's an average defense right now, so they don't have to sort of come up very far to be a very good defense, really, do they? And the defensive line, I mean, you've got the all-pros of Carlos Dunlap and Geno Atkins on that line, and there's a couple of, rookies coming in, Sam Hubbard, for example, Andrew Brown, nose tackle you picked in the 5th. How does that defensive line sort of pan out, do you think?
Yeah, when my partner Jim and I on the beat we ranked the positions about from strongest to weakest, and my number one strength of this team, I think, is the defensive line. I think that they've brought in youth to infuse as rotational pieces, but their starters are top of the line, and it would be crazy to think that Carl Lawson is not going to at least be the same guy that he was last year, and that was just an absolute monster. In pass rush situations, Carlos Dunlap, Geno Atkins, I expect Terrell Austin to do some interesting things with Carlos Dunlap to try to kind of invigorate him a little bit, move him around a little bit. They've got enough pieces there. Chris Baker, kind of an under-the-radar signing that they made, hoping that he can regain the disruptive force that he was when he was in Washington. He had a real tumultuous free agent year in Tampa Bay last year and was kind of kicked to the curb. But I mean, I think they might have found a bargain in him. They've got a lot. I mentioned Jordan Willis earlier. They have a lot going for them on the defensive line, and I really think it can be and will be the strength of this defense once again, because they can be rotational and they can be elite at the starter position, and that's a good that's a good place to start.
Oh yeah, and I mean, if there's a weak point in this defense, it's right in the middle, I think. Well, from my opinion, I don't know if you will agree, but obviously Burfict is the talent of the guy is amazing, and the other stuff you just kind of have to put up with and just kind of factor in, I guess. But we'll miss the first 4. Preston Brown was an addition. Vinny Ray is sort of Mr. Consistent, but he's sort of average. And Malik Jefferson, who you drafted, Nick Vigil in there. It's an okay crew, but maybe it's been improved a little bit there.
Yeah, maybe. You're right. It has been and continues to be the problem area for this defense. They don't have much playmaking there outside of Burfict, and he's unreliable. I have sort of termed the hashtag relying on the unreliable, because that's what they've done in so many spots, whether it be Tyler Eifert, whether it be investing in John Ross, whether it be Vontaze Burfict. These guys that have, whether injury or attitude or whatever issues, they've made the centerpiece of their core, of their nucleus. And so to have to have Vontaze Burfict there missing the first 4 games, who knows what he's going to look like when he comes back after that. We've seen year after year, this is the 3rd straight year he's been suspended at least 3 games to start the season. And we've seen year after year, it has taken him multiple games to get into anything near the Vontaze Burfict that people expect. So I have no reason to believe that won't be the case again this year. So you're getting half a season if he stays healthy out of the guy, and that's a lot of games.
Yeah.
And so, they don't. Preston Brown is great. He makes tackles. He's never really proven himself to be a playmaker, and I don't know. They're going to need to see Nick Vigil take a step or Jordan Evans take a step in order to get playmaking out of that position. It is going to be what teams are going to attempt to exploit.
Yeah, and it's fortunate that the D-line is so strong, and the defensive backfield's pretty strong too. The corners, Draker Patrick and William Jackson, are both great, and, in the middle, Sean Williams and George Iloka are also pretty good. So that defensive backfield is, on paper, pretty good.
Yeah, and you didn't mention Darqueze Dennard, who I think really took a huge step last year and played great and really embraced and thrived in the slot role for the first time. And he's got the perfect recipe across this league. Contract year, on the rookie contract, ready to go off and cash in March. And guys tend to show up in great shape. They tend to play their butts off, and they tend to have their best seasons ever when they're in the last year of their first contract. And he's entering that. I think it can be a really special player for him, and I think William Jackson is going to be incredible this year. So, I think teams are going to target Draker Patrick, which isn't all bad. And he has his moments where he struggles, but he also can be a playmaker for you, and I think you can have worse situations than having that be the quote-unquote weak link amongst your top 3.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned Dennard because, when you've got players like that in your defensive backfield, you can just, especially if you've got a weak linebacker core, you could just sort of default to a bit of nickel and just get a whole lot of those guys on the field.
Yeah, and that's across this league. Most teams, that's the base now, and they've played. We'll see what Terrell Austin does, but I'd anticipate them to be a nickel like most teams in the 70s, 75% of their snaps. And that's okay though. The fewer linebackers and the more DBs, the better. I think for this team for sure.
Yeah.
But if they can, and for all that he is, Jordan Evans, who they drafted, is a really good coverage linebacker. So if you get him in there in nickel, you're feeling good in passing situations for sure. You hope they can match up with tight ends, things like that. But every defense has some kind of weak spot somewhere.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Now, it's always difficult to kind of put a figure on how you think they'll do. Certainly last year, was a 7-9 season. It was a down year. And, there's been a lot of sort of positive change, seemingly. How do you think they'll go?
I thought that they have really been sort of disrespected nationally, so to speak, and in Vegas. The odds, some people have them as tied for the worst odds to win the Super Bowl and tie with the Browns to win the North, and people are really down on them because most people look at it and say, oh, Marvin Lewis is back. They didn't make any splashes. They drafted an offensive lineman, whatever, just the same old Bengals. And the Bengals won 7 games last year, and that's not great, but they didn't win 2. They won 7,
yeah.
And they are a better team than they were coming off the field last year in Baltimore. And I believe that because their offensive line is so much better, and the young core that they have is a year older. I think they're going to be invigorated a little bit by some of the new blood on the coaching staff and the new offense. How long it takes them to adjust to the new offense, into the new coaching staff, will be a big part of whether this team is 10-6, 9-7, or back in the 7-9, 6-10 range. I think if everything goes well, and that means Tyler Eifert doesn't get hurt and gives you a decent season, Cordy Glenn stays healthy, John Ross becomes effective, Joe Mixon has a breakout year, I think they can win the North. I think they're a 10-11 win team. But the odds of all that happening are slim. So they're probably a 8-9 win team if everything goes down the middle. So we'll see how it plays out. But the potential is certainly there. I think health is going to be a big factor because they do have a lot of their chips in some unhealthy guys, some guys with injury history.
Yeah, and look, let's face it, 9 wins in the AFC can get you in the playoff race, so... Yeah, so, I mean, look, that'd be good. See them get there, and it'll be interesting to see how the year goes. Now, I don't know if you remember, but last year we had a question we were asking about a step-up player, but this year we've kind of mixed it up. We're just asking who do you think is like the locker room guy for the Bengals, like sort of the motivational, the guy that's kind of bringing people together behind the scenes and a bit of the sort of emotional strength, I guess.
That's a good one. I'm trying to think who would be considered. See, I mean, forever it was Andrew Whitworth, and he was the best at. I mean, he was the undeniable leader of that locker room, and now, it's harder to say who that is, and I think that's been part of, their problem a little bit is that they haven't necessarily had that background. I think they think Billy Price can be that, but he's a rookie right now. He's just trying to keep his nose down, keep it straight. Yeah. But he has all the characteristics of a future Andrew Whitworth for sure. I think Andy Dalton, he people knock him, but he's the guy people look to. And AJ Green is in the same way. He's the guy when young guys come into the locker room, they say, "Oh, there's AJ Green," right? Yeah. If you're a rookie, you want to go say hi and meet and get to know AJ Green, and there's a respect there. But you're right, and the fiery gather them all up and let's talk guy. I don't know if that's there. Vontaze is probably has been that for that defense. But I'm not going to rehash everything we had to say about him. So it's like, who is that? Drake Kirkpatrick is part of that group. But yeah, I think that it's a good question that you ask, because I think that's kind of something the Bengals need to have organically developed this year.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting you mentioned Andrew Whitworth, because as soon as you did, I was like, of course, yes, he definitely was. It was quite obvious. Even a non-Bengals person, that he was the locker room guy. But interesting. Yeah. Paul, thanks so much for your time. It's always great to chat to you, and I know things are going to get super busy for you, so wanted to catch you before that sort of time began, and we'll give you, as you said, there's lots of Aussies tuning into the Bengals Beat podcast, which is great to hear, and we just always enjoy sort of following your stuff coming out of training camp or just during the off-season. So people can follow you at Paul Dehner Jr. and obviously your work with the Cincinnati Enquirer, and really appreciate your time, Paul. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
It's been great. So thanks so much, and bring on training camp. I think we're all itching for season to start.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no doubt. I hope all is well down under, and anytime you need me, just let me know.
All the best. Thanks so much, Paul. That's fantastic.
Thanks.
Okay, have a good day. See ya. Okay, hope you've enjoyed that. That was Paul Dehner Jr. He's a fantastic guy and just an absolute wealth of information for the Bengals, a team that's going to be super interesting to watch this off-season and season for that matter. Lots of storylines coming out of Cincinnati. So anyway, that's the Bengals preview for 2018, and thanks so much for listening. G's not here, he's on vacation, but on behalf of G and myself, we'll catch you next time.